time to hit the books every once in a while, keep sharp. Here with a refresher course on the ABCs of personal finances, financial planner Rob Wilson. Rob, always good to have you here this morning.
Thanks for having me.
All right, going back to school. So what do you mean by that? What do you mean about getting attuned to what's going on?
Well, just as you said, I think even if you've been out of school for quite some time, it's always good to just go take a refresher course, remind yourself of some important topics, and I think this is especially true when it comes to your money. You know, you can get sort of set in your ways. You've been doing the same thing for a lot of years. Good to take a step back, review, refresh, and maybe something will remind you of something that you need to do.
Well, I think in this era, too, when you consider the fact there's so many online resources and so many people kind of take control of their own investments and maybe don't always go to a professional, maybe they lose a little sight of what to know.
Correct. And so I think it is a really good idea to take a step back, totally forget about what your current situation is, and maybe you'll remember something that you thought of a couple of years ago and never really implemented.
All right, so let's talk about the ABCs of personal finance. You're calling them the building blocks of your financial life.
So anytime, you know, when you're going back to school, you know you have to get books. Now, these books that I'm going to recommend today hopefully aren't as expensive as your children's books when they go back to college, but there are some very good personal finance books out there. The first one is called The Wealthy Barber. Now, the reason I like this one is that it's told in a story form. So instead of sort of putting a book out that has the topics and very dry, I mean, personal finance isn't the most interesting subject in the world, but this is told as a story of there's three 20-somethings who go to a small town barber who's also a millionaire, and along the way he gives them a lot of very good financial tips, starting with the 10% solution, where he says the first thing that you need to do is take 10% of whatever you earn and save that for long-term growth. So you want to be invested in stocks and things that are going to appreciate for you over the long term. He also talks about wills, life insurance, and responsibility. Hey, we just had this big hurricane over the weekend, and so, you know, things can be going great in your life and all of a sudden something bad happens. So you've got to be prepared for those sort of things and have insurance and have these important documents ready. The other thing he talks about is home sweet home. Talks about the process of buying a home, but also mentions that renting is not as bad as people make it out to be. So a lot of people say if you're renting, you don't buy a house, you're wasting money. But similar to the way that you need food to stay alive, you need shelter. So just because you need food, you wouldn't necessarily go out and start a farm.
Right.
So renting is okay. In a lot of cases, it's cheaper in the long run. He talks about investment and taxes. So when you get a windfall, especially like when you get this tax refund in April, use that to pay off your credit card. That's going to be one of the biggest investments that you can make. If your credit card interest rate is 15 or 20%, think about that as the amount that you could earn on a stock portfolio.
You're investing in yourself there.
You got it. Okay. You got it. And one more thing, he talks about graduation. He says that, you know, $6,000 or 6 months of expenses is a little overdrawn for emergency fund. Maybe $3,000 is pretty good, and you can put the rest of that money to work. Saving for college. An important note is that your earning power is often your greatest asset, so you really want to hone that ability.
Okay, now you're talking about going back to school. I know that every class has that one kid in the front who just overachieves beyond belief, and you resent him a little bit, but you realize he has something, and that goes into what you're calling the greatest second act in the history of business.
Yeah, the thing that you have to realize is that you can learn a lot from the guy that sits in the front of the class and gets A's on all the exams. So a big news item last week was that Steve Jobs, the CEO of Apple, announced that he was resigning from the CEO position and just going to be chairman. He's had some health issues, so he's decided to step down. But if you really think about it, you know, we've got the iPad, the iPhone, the iMac, everything.
Got them all.
You know, you can take a lot of tips from his success. It really is the greatest second act because he was actually fired from Apple at one point. So I think there's a book called Icon, and it's Steve Jobs, the greatest second act in business history. The first thing I think is entrepreneurship. So you see that this, you know, Steve Jobs didn't even graduate college, had a great idea, decided to start this company out of a garage and built this into a huge business. So I think that you want to take those points and say, you know what, starting a business is a great thing to do. The tax laws are much more favorable to business than they are to individuals. So to the extent that you can, go out and start a business. But you also want to learn from failure. Steve Jobs was actually fired from the company that he started in 1985. There were some issues. The board, you know, he actually resigned before they really fired him, but it was a firing. But he came back, they rehired him in 1996, and during the time he was off, let's not forget that he started Pixar, which is now a big movie studio, and was bought by Disney and made him effectively a billionaire. So there are things that you can learn from failure. Success doesn't always happen in a straight line, and so if you can take those failures and learn from them, you can ultimately be more successful in the end.
All right. And one thing that you mentioned here, I like this, your homework assignment. What's the homework? What do we have to do moving forward to reinvent ourselves, to re-educate ourselves?
Well, I tell you what, reading these books in and of itself is not an accomplishment. This information is no good if you don't take something and use it. So I think the first thing that I recommend to people is take very good notes. So when you sit down, you're reading these books, have a notebook sitting right next to you so that you can take the important points, things that mean something to you, and jot them down. And make sure that it has a hard copy, not something that's going to get ripped up very easy. And I suggest that people take this same journal anytime they go to a conference or to some sort of meeting where they hear a motivational speaker or someone who's going to give them a lot of tips. You can't do anything if you're going to forget that as soon as you walk out. Carry this journal with you, take those notes, and put one of these ideas into practice. Rome was not built in a day. You cannot do everything at once. Take one idea and start to put that in progress, and you'll see a lot of change in your life. And review these notes very often. Set aside some time to get your journal out, review them periodically, and then you'll find another new idea that you can then start to implement.
Well, I can't tell you how many times that I've been, whether awake at night or just in the car or something, and something pops into my head, an idea. And just going back to Steve Jobs for a second, I mean, who would have thought that a touchscreen phone would be such a big industry? But that was a little inkling of an idea that he executed, and it's everybody has an iPhone almost.
And you bring up a great point in that a lot of people are struggling with their jobs right now. I think an important thing that you can take from him is to think forward. A lot of companies right now are trying to chase Apple. So Apple came out with a touchscreen phone. Another company wants to come out with a touchscreen phone instead of thinking ahead and maybe having come out with the iPad before Apple had a chance to do that. So think about what the next big idea instead of always chasing what's out there.
All right. Rob Wilson, always good to see you here.
Thank
you very much. We appreciate it. And financial advisor Rob Wilson's here with us for Money Monday, every other Monday on the show. And you can find Rob at Blazer Capital Management if you want to get in touch with him.